The story begins with an adventurer named Rent journeying through a dungeon. He is stunned when he comes face to face with a formidable, winged monster boasting impressively muscular biceps. The creature reveals a secondary mouth within its first one, sending Rent into a state of utter terror, realizing he might not survive this encounter. The monstrous creature, resembling a giant Digimon, advances towards Rent, who is trembling uncontrollably. Rent is in disbelief, as his dream of becoming a mithril-class adventurer seems to be crumbling before his eyes. His situation worsens when the beast attacks him with both its mouths. After the attack, Rent is shocked to discover he's still alive, but even more astounding is that he's been transformed into a skeleton. Haunted by this horrifying transformation, Rent reminisces about his past when he was flesh and blood, blissfully unaware of his grim future. He used to start his days early, envying the luxurious lives of nobles and scholars who could sleep in. But little did he know, waking up early would soon become the least of his worries. Rent, a low bronze-class adventurer, was raised in a small, obscure town. He relied on the Adventurers Guild for jobs, which were assigned based on rank and skill to prevent unprepared adventurers from meeting untimely ends or turning into skeletons. The guild offered a variety of tasks, from exciting monster hunts to mundane material gathering. Despite being approached by some unambitious adventurers, Rent decides to return to the labyrinth due to the lack of appealing jobs. His peers, preferring leisure activities like playing Fortnite, can't fathom Rent's dedication to his work. Rent prefers to adventure alone, not because of a solitary hero complex, but because he's simply not very skilled. Despite a decade of adventuring, he's still only at the second lowest rank. He scrapes by selling items from cautious jobs and lives a frugal life. His life, while uneventful, involves careful planning in every aspect. However, this caution is thrown to the wind when he stumbles upon a secret passage in a well-explored, deserted dungeon. Rent eagerly explores this newfound area, hoping to find magical treasures. His excitement grows as he realizes that even reporting this discovery to the guild could earn him a fortune. Rent fails to recognize the clear danger signs in a mysterious room. Here, he confronts what he believes is a dragon, the most formidable of all monsters. This dragon appears to have evolved into its ultimate form, emitting a presence so intense it paralyzes Rent, making him realize he stands no chance against this colossal dragonman. Fast forward to the present, Rent is puzzled about how he's still alive after being devoured by the dragon. He's now just a skeleton, an immortal undead creature. Rent knows he's vulnerable to purification magic used by bishops or priests, as undead beings are unnatural in this world. Despite lacking a brain, Rent is deep in thought. He still has his consciousness and memories, suggesting he's alive in some way. He considers returning to town but fears being captured or executed. Confused about his existence, Rent decides to leave the dungeon and avoid his problems. As he leaves, Rent muses over the mysteries of labyrinths, their origins, and the treasures and dangers within. He plans to seek advice from adventurers coming to the dungeon, but realizes he must figure out how to speak without a tongue. Suddenly, a skeleton monster appears, and Rent prepares for battle. Struggling to move due to his skeletal form, he realizes his physical limitations. As a human, skeletons were easy to defeat, but now he struggles to lift his sword. In a moment of vulnerability, Rent discovers he can still use spirit energy, even as an undead. This boosts his physical ability, allowing him to crush his opponent. Surprisingly, defeating the skeleton lets Rent recover the spirit energy he used. The story then flashes back to a time when a woman taught Rent about monsters. She explains that they evolve with time and experience, becoming more formidable. This applies to humans too, who grow through training, but monsters evolve on a whole different level. She uses skeletons as an example of this mysterious evolutionary trait. Skeletons usually remain unchanged, but sometimes they evolve into ghouls through a process called existential evolution. Rent, now a skeleton, sees hope in this. Ghouls look somewhat human because they have flesh. He thinks if he becomes a ghoul, he could disguise himself with robes and masks and return to town without scaring people with his skeletal appearance. Feeling optimistic, Rent sets a new goal: defeat monsters in the labyrinth to evolve into a ghoul. Meanwhile, in town, Rent's friend is disappointed he hasn't returned and decides to make dinner alone. Back in the dungeon, Rent is making progress, having already defeated 5 skeletons. He's regained his mobility and discovered that light from defeated enemies heals him, allowing him to use spirit energy in each battle. Looking for stronger monsters, Rent encounters a slime. They're weak but tricky, as physical attacks don't work well on them. Rent, lacking offensive magic skills and able to only start fires, opts to attack with his sword. He knows slimes can be defeated by piercing their core or breaking them apart until they can't regenerate. Surprisingly, he manages to strike the slime's core, defeating it and taking a magic stone as a reward. He also collects slime ooze to sell later, as it's used in cosmetics. At the guild, two people discuss a newbie looking for a party. They consider recommending her to join Rent, but he's been absent. The newbie, needing money, is advised to explore an easy labyrinth for treasure and material, unaware it's the same labyrinth where Rent. In the labyrinth, Rent reflects on his undead state. He doesn't feel sleep or hunger, which is just as well since he couldn't digest food. He's been fighting non-stop, realizing that evolving into a ghoul will take time. However, his physical abilities and mana use have improved. Surprisingly, he can still use his divinity, a power used to cure injuries and illnesses, purify water, and preserve food despite being undead. Rent uses his divinity to preserve some bread for 3 more days, hoping to regain a normal body that can eat by then. Focused on his goal, he cautiously plans his battles, deciding to flee if he faces more than 4 monsters at once. In this low-level labyrinth, encountering more than 5 monsters would likely spell doom for him. Rent is hard on himself for still being weak despite 10 years as an adventurer and 20 years of training. He possesses spirit energy, mana, and divinity, a rare combination even among the highest-ranked adventurers. Yet, he wishes for just one powerful ability. Most people in his situation would quit adventuring, but Rent persisted, training daily and learning about monsters and magic from a knowledgeable woman. His ultimate goal is to become a mithril-class adventurer, a rank held by those who have saved nations. Despite now being a skeleton, Rent's determination remains unshaken. As he defeats more skeletons, Rent begins to feel stronger than when he was human. After easily taking down another slime, he's sure of his growing strength. Collecting slime goo, he experiences a significant change when light emerges from it. Muscles and hair start forming on his body, followed by skin and eyes. Rent evolves into a ghoul, a significant step forward. Though he's just a dried-out corpse, he's relieved to have flesh again. He thinks he might even evolve into a higher-ranking undead, like a vampire, if he keeps working hard. Now with flesh, Rent tries speaking but can only produce a roar. After some practice, he manages to say hello and good morning, though he sounds more like a zombie. Later, Rent, now with flesh, battles goblins in the dungeon. These goblins are dangerous in groups, but Rent cleverly uses the dungeon's layout to isolate a few for easier combat. Rent, now evolved into a ghoul, has gained muscle and become more agile than when he was just bones. Surprisingly, his mana, spirit energy, and divinity have all increased, making him stronger. He's now able to enhance not just himself but also his sword, which he uses to swiftly defeat a group of goblins. During his exploration, Rent hears a fight nearby and discovers it's a blonde girl from the guild. She's battling a weak skeleton. Rent is excited to see another human after such a long time, but he stops himself from approaching her, aware of his ghastly ghoul appearance. He decides to watch her from afar, realizing he's never seen her before and figuring she must be a new adventurer. Rent reflects on his knowledge of the adventurers in town, knowing them well since they often mock weaker members like him. So, understanding their abilities and allies is beneficial. Rent continues to observe the girl, noting her training but also her lack of strength. She carefully times her attacks but fails to be aware of her surroundings. This leads to her being cornered by a skeleton, but she bravely fights back despite being overpowered. Seeing no other option, Rent intervenes to save her. The girl is shocked and terrified at the sight of the ghastly ghoul. Rent wishes she would help him fight the skeleton, but she's too stunned to be of any use. He quickly dispatches the skeleton and checks on her. When he tries to speak, his zombie-like voice scares her further. To demonstrate he's not a threat, Rent throws away his sword. The girl slowly realizes he's trying to communicate and understands that he's Rent the adventurer. She wonders if his ghoul appearance is some kind of disguise. Rent is at a loss for words to explain his situation to Rena, the girl he just saved. He's technically dead, yet still alive. Rena, realizing he's different from the monsters, thanks him for saving her. Rent reassures her that he's not a threat and asks for her help. She agrees to buy him a rope so he can return to town, and Rent lets her keep the change. Rena introduces herself as the daughter of a knight and promises to help Rent as a way to repay him for saving her. After she leaves, Rent notices her cautious behavior around him. He knows a sensible adventurer would report a mysterious ghoul like him to the guild, but he trusts that Rena, a stranger, won't betray his trust. Back in town, the first thing Rena does is rush to the guild. The guild lady, who was worried about Rena, listens as Rena urgently asks her a question. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Rent battles another slime and confirms he's much stronger than he was as a human. His body moves precisely as he wants, and he easily destroys another slime. Rent starts to think his improved combat skills come from intuition rather than training or study. Ironically, he only gained this power after becoming an undead. To Rent's surprise, Rena returns to the dungeon. He convinces her that he's the same ghoul she met before, explaining that ghouls don't usually appear on the dungeon's early levels. Rena notices that Rent's speech has improved, and he shares that he's been practicing. Rena brings Rent clothes, but she's still scared of his ghoul appearance. She apologizes and hopes she'll get used to it. Rent appreciates her choice of a mage-like robe that covers his entire body. Rena also thoughtfully brings him boots, gloves, and bandages, explaining she had to ask around town for shop locations since she's new. The bandages, she suggests, can cover his arms and legs, showing that she's considered everything he might need. Rent feels moved by Rena's kindness, but as a ghoul, he can't even cry since his body lacks the necessary functions. After putting on the clothes Rena brought, Rent looks quite presentable. The outfit is more comfortable than he expected, though it slightly hinders his visibility. However, he assures Rena that everything is perfect, as he can still fight effectively. Rena makes an awkward move by showing Rent his now ghastly face in a mirror. Realizing his appearance could be problematic, she presents him with a mask. The mask seems to attach itself to his face almost urgently. To their dismay, they find it won't come off. Both are alarmed, and Rena admits that the shop where she bought the mask seemed a bit shady. She chose it for its low price of just 3 copper coins and didn't notice any curses when she touched it. Rent surmises that the mask's curse activates upon being worn. Rena is amazed to see Rent using divinity, and wonders if he can break the curse. Rent tries, but his energy depletes quickly, leaving the curse intact. Rent reassures her that the mask reacted to his divinity, so he plans to save money and seek a powerful cleric to remove the curse. He starts to distance himself, remembering his monstrous form, but Rena stops him. She acknowledges that Rent is not a bad person and says she's no longer scared, despite still trembling. Rent tells her there's no need to rush in getting used to him being a ghoul. Rena promises it won't take long for her to adjust, and they head back to town. During their journey, Rena shares that she left the capital for Malt because there were no suitable jobs for rookies like her there. Rent is amazed that Rena traveled to the countryside, but she explains her desire to see the world and quickly become a skilled adventurer. Rent advises that being cautious, like him, is wise for adventurers since everyone has only one life. Rena agrees, and they share a laugh over a joke about Rent being a rare zombie. Upon reaching Malt, Rent notes that many locals know him, so using his ID might raise suspicions due to his changed appearance. They choose to enter through a different gate. Rent thanks Rena, acknowledging he wouldn't have made it without her help. He expresses concern about putting her in a difficult position, as aiding him might be seen as a crime, risking her adventurer's license. Rena, feeling indebted to Rent for saving her life, is willing to take that risk. At the west entrance, the guards question Rent's unusual look. The situation escalates when they demand to see his face. Rena cleverly explains that Rent's mask is cursed and cannot be removed, and his strange voice is due to an injury inflicted by a monster. She presents his disfigured ear as proof, adding that the mask was meant to cover his scars, but turned out to be cursed. The guards, sympathetic to Rent's misfortune, allow them to enter after failing to remove the mask. Rena dismisses her actions as mere repayment, but soon after, Rent disappears. He watches Rena search for him, reflecting on her potential as an adventurer. He notes her well-maintained but inexpensive equipment, her decent fighting skills, and her bravery. Rent acknowledges that talented individuals like her usually leave him, so he decides to leave her for now, planning to apologize when he looks more human. Rent's true intention for leaving Rena is revealed when he visits a more suitable human collaborator, someone with a secretive past. He enters a house belonging to Lorraine, his chosen collaborator. Attempting to wake her with his distorted voice, he resorts to threatening to drop a book on her. Lorraine recognizes him despite his covered appearance, but is startled when Rent unexpectedly reveals his ghoulish arm. This brings an end to our episode 1 and 2. Subscribe for more anime recaps. Before Ren got to his friend's house, Lorraine was really tired from working too much while waiting for him. She figured it was pointless to look for the adventure by herself and considered asking the guild for help. Then, she heard a knock at the door and knew right away it was her friend by the way he knocked. Feeling relieved to know he was there, Lorraine decided to get some rest, trusting Ren could let himself in. She was mostly concerned about his safety, not even considering the possibility that he might have turned into something unnatural. But when he showed up and shared his story, Lorraine was taken aback. Despite her knowledge of monsters and magic, she had never heard of someone turning into an undead from being eaten by a dragon. She wondered if the dragon was still in the dungeon, but Ren wasn't sure. He guessed it had left. Lorraine found his story hard to believe, but seeing Ren's condition confirmed it was true. Ren saw that Lorraine stayed calm, which he expected since she was a scholar, mage, and adventurer. Yet, he felt like she saw him more as a research subject than a friend. Lorraine then bluntly asked him if he was sure he was still himself. Ren believed he retained his consciousness, and memories, yet he knew he had died and couldn't be certain he was the same person. His response sounded just like something he would say, though Lorraine found it hard to confirm his identity. Nonetheless, she chose to focus on what Ren wanted to do next. Ren said he wanted to keep adventuring and reach the mithril class, despite his new appearance making it impossible to visit the guild. Lorraine realized he needed her to pick up quests for him. She also knew he couldn't stay at an inn and offered her place for him to stay. Understanding Ren would want to contribute, she suggested he assist with her research in exchange for lodging. After all, studying a monster that had experienced such a unique transformation was a rare opportunity. Ren agreed to help Lorraine with her research, on the condition that he wouldn't be dissected. Lorraine jokingly asked if he thought she was a monster, but then hinted she might need just a little bit of his skin and flesh for study. Afterward, Lorraine went out to sell the magic stones and slime liquid Ren had collected in the lunar reflection labyrinth. Thanks to the high-quality materials, she came back with a decent sum of money. Ren then shared that he planned to visit the three-pointed spear to look for a blacksmith. Walking through the streets, his unique appearance caught everyone's attention. At the blacksmith's, he requested a new sword, and the shop attendant noticed his old sword was well used but beyond repair. Observing the damage, she guessed Ren could wield magic or spiritual energy. Ren added that he also had divine energy, surprising the attendant since it was rare for someone to possess all three types of energy. She mentioned he was only the second person they knew of with such ability. Ren asked her to keep this information confidential, and she agreed, stating that maintaining clients' privacy was part of their service. Ren paid a hefty deposit for a high-quality new sword, with the agreement to pay the rest later. The attendant informed him that crafting the sword would take some time, as the blacksmith was meticulous and took pride in his work. He might also want to consult with Ren during the process. Ren assured her that wouldn't be an issue, as the blacksmith could get in touch with Lorraine whenever he needed to discuss the sword further. While at home, Lorraine dove into her studies on ghouls, undead beings known for their strength and ability to live through severe injuries like losing their head. Her research showed that ghouls often crave the flesh of living creatures, especially humans, and are typically found in dark places like labyrinths. Some stories suggest ghouls arise from dead humans, while other tales talk of powerful monsters that can transform humans into mindless undead, stripping away their personality and emotions. However, Ren's situation, where he retained his memories and emotions, was unheard of in her studies, making him a unique case. Lorraine reminisced about her early days at the guild when she was asked to take Ren, then a beginner adventurer, with her into the Blue Forest to help him gain experience. Back then, despite her significant achievement of becoming the youngest Grand Doctor and earning a Silver Class Adventurer status, life seemed uninteresting to her. She had gone to the nation of Yarlan under the guise of collecting herbs, but in reality, she was just looking for something to do, feeling directionless. During their task, Lorraine aimed to carefully harvest a particular plant, ensuring to get its roots. She asked Ren to bring his backpack for storing the plant, and was surprised to find he had already gathered several plants correctly, roots and all, showing a good understanding of the task despite his inexperience. Their peaceful gathering was interrupted when Ren noticed a goblin aiming at them. He quickly moved to shield Lorraine, telling her to use her magic against the goblin. After she successfully defeated the creature, Ren was impressed, thinking that her magic was on another level because she was a Silver Class Adventurer. Lorraine modestly disagreed, implying there was nothing extraordinary about her magical attack. After the battle, Ren handed Lorraine a cup of water, inquiring if that was her first real fight. Lorraine admitted it wasn't, but she usually had company or guards with her, making her realize that instead of her helping Ren, it was he who had been assisting her. Ren pointed out her apparent lack of experience for someone of her class, which was why people were worried about her venturing into the Blue Forest alone, suggesting his accompaniment as a safety measure. Lorraine noted Ren's extensive knowledge about herbs, and he shared that a seasoned adventurer once told him the importance of education in various fields for adventurers. Realizing she hadn't asked for his name, Ren introduced himself, and Lorraine did the same, asking him to share his knowledge with her, impressed by his understanding of herbs, monsters, and navigation. Their friendship formed quickly, and over the next decade, Ren worked hard towards achieving Mithril Class, with Lorraine always by his side, deepening her research. Lorraine acknowledged how she had changed, understanding the concern others had for her and regretting not keeping in touch with them. Returning to the present, Ren thanked the blacksmith, Cloak, for agreeing to craft a new weapon for him. The girl at the shop lent Ren a sword to use in the meantime, which Cloak mentioned could channel magic and spiritual energy, cautioning against using other powers. Despite sensing Ren's troubles, Cloak and the girl chose not to pry, suspecting a curse might be involved. Later, Ren cooked dinner for Lorraine, who was thankful. Although noticing Ren didn't eat, he explained his lack of appetite in his undead state. Lorraine shared her findings on ghouls, highlighting Rent's unique evolution, and pondered his future development. Rent expressed his desire to regain his humanity by defeating monsters and evolving further. Back in the moonlit labyrinth, Rent saved a man from a slime attack but was cautious due to the potential for deception among adventurers. Despite this, the man followed Rent, asking to join him after admitting his newness to adventuring and his dire financial situation, hoping to resolve his debt through adventuring. Rent, though wary, decided to let the man accompany him, reflecting on his own identity and the oddity of suddenly having a companion. Despite the uncertainty, Rent and the new guy, the cook, keep moving together. Rent takes him through a hidden path where he had a dangerous encounter with a dragon, thinking it might still have valuable items that could help the cook pay off his debts. The cook is surprised by the discovery, as his map showed nothing there, just a dead end. As they explore, they come across a small entrance leading to another secret area. The cook wonders aloud if Rent could earn some money by sharing this discovery with the guild, but Rent doesn't respond. Understanding Rent's silence, the cook promises not to claim the discovery as his own, recognizing Rent's lack of interest in recognition. Rent suggests they check out the new passage together. They find themselves in an empty room. The cook starts looking for more hidden spots, hoping to find treasure. Rent notices a strange drawing on the floor and tries to caution him, but it's too late. The cook steps on it and vanishes, teleported away by what Rent realizes must be a magic circle meant to transport them to a more dangerous part of the labyrinth. Rent faces a moral dilemma: leave the cook behind or follow him, potentially into a more perilous situation. Deciding he can't just abandon him, Rent steps onto the circle, instantly teleporting to the cook's location. He finds the cook on the ground, unharmed but shaken. Before they can take a breath, Rent finds himself trapped in a room of the labyrinth with a giant skeleton, realizing the exit has disappeared. Unwilling to give up, he decides to fight, using his divine energy despite warnings against it. To his relief, his sword holds up, and he defeats the giant skeleton with 2 strikes. After the battle, Rent heals the novice's wounds with his magic, providing limited relief for superficial injury. The novice is surprised and impressed by Rent's prowess, considering the giant skeleton a powerful monster. Rent reveals he obtained a valuable magic stone with the victory and offers it to the novice to settle his debts. However, Rent explains it won't be entirely free. Rent shows the novice a part of his arm, altered after being defeated by a monster. He can't enter guilds or shops, so he needs someone to do it for him. The novice agrees, finding it a straightforward task, but Rent requests free meals at the novice's restaurant in return. The cook agrees, grateful for the help in settling his debts, and offers Rent the freedom to eat at his restaurant whenever he wants. With the deal settled, Rent and the novice prepare to leave the labyrinth. Rent realizes the novice can't see the magic teleportation circles indicating the exit. Trusting Rent, the novice follows his guidance, and they both return to Malt. Rent decides to explore the labyrinth another time. Back in Malt, Rent accompanies the novice to his restaurant, the Red Dragon Tavern, as gratitude for the assistance. The adventurer enters a well-presented place, noticing it seems bankrupt, possibly due to the taste of the food. The cook's wife appears, relieved to see her husband safe, but becomes worried when she notices his injury. The guy reassures her, explaining the adventurer saved him and healed his injuries. To their surprise, the adventurer also hands over the amount needed to pay their debt in the form of a magic stone. However, the wife is suspicious, thinking it's too good to be true and worrying about potential deception. The guy, named Loris, assures her that the adventurer is genuinely good-hearted and helped him when he learned about the debt. In return, the adventurer will assist with simple tasks, including allowing him to eat for free at the restaurant. The wife is puzzled as it seems like a small favor compared to the help received, but Loris emphasizes that it means a lot to them in finally getting rid of the debt. Emotional and grateful, they thank the adventurer for all the help. Loris introduces himself and his wife Isabel, expressing their gratitude as the adventurer, Rent, says his goodbyes. Loris, grateful for being saved, asks to know the name of his savior. Rent, wanting to keep his identity confidential, introduces himself, and Loris promises to call him adventurer to maintain the secrecy. Loris invites Rent to his restaurant anytime, expressing joy in serving him. Rent leaves and heads to Lorraine's house. Along the way, he senses something strange and ponders his current state. Reaching Lorraine's place, he notices his vision acting peculiar. Inside, Lorraine asks about his labyrinth adventure and the letters from the Empire. She senses something is off with Rent but assumes he might be drunk. Rent, however, loses control and attacks Lorraine, biting her shoulder. Concerned, she uses magic to make him unconscious. Upon waking, Rent apologizes, explaining that he met a man in the labyrinth whose taste drove him to madness, leading to the unfortunate incident with Lorraine. Lorraine, anticipating the possibility of Rent losing control due to his ghoul nature, uses magic to subdue him. Before leaving him alone, she shows him the wound on her shoulder, explaining that she had just sold her potions to the magic pharmacy. Despite planning to make a healing potion in the morning, Rent decides to use his divine magic to heal her immediately. Lorraine, surprised by the effectiveness of divine magic, feels a pleasant sensation as the pain fades away, leaving only a mark. Rent continues to heal until there's no trace of the injury, astounding Lorraine. Rent notices changes in his appearance, realizing that his mask now covers only his eyes. Experimenting with the mask's responsiveness to desires, he tries to hide his mouth, and the mask obediently covers the lower part of his face. Curious about the mask, Lorraine suggests attempting to remove it. Both Rent and Lorraine try, but the mask remains firmly attached. Lorraine speculates about the mask's nature, comparing it to magic swords with a will of their own. Rent decides to keep the lower part of his face covered, accepting his undead state. Lorraine notices that Rent can now speak more clearly and naturally, and Rent believes he might have undergone existential evolution again, possibly turning into the giant skeleton he defeated. However, he questions the timing, as the evolution into a ghoul happened immediately. Lorraine suggests that it might have occurred when he fed on her blood, changing him from a ghoul into a ghast, a weaker servant of vampires. Rent wonders why he turned into a ghast, and Lorraine explains that existential evolution is a mystery even for scholars. She then shares her theory about evolution and asks if Rent wants to know more. Rent agrees, and Lorraine explains that existential evolution happens when a monster transforms into a more powerful being. She mentions Rent's initial form as a skeleton and subsequent evolution into a ghoul. Lorraine hypothesizes that Rent's evolution is driven by his desire to appear as close to human as possible. Rent finds the theory sensible but questions why he didn't evolve into a vampire, which is more human-like than a ghast. Lorraine clarifies that evolution might follow a sequential path, much like the stages of gaining power in the Adventurers Guild. She compares it to experiments with smaller monsters that evolve based on their environment, adapting to factors like fire or water. Lorraine suggests that Rent's evolution might be a passive response to his environment while still being influenced by his own will. Rent contemplates the possibility of evolving into a vampire and eventually returning to his human state. However, Lorraine is skeptical, thinking that only the first option might be feasible, and she's uncertain if he can fully revert to his original form. She believes that future existential evolutions might involve more than defeating monsters, especially considering his transformation into a ghast after ingesting her blood. Lorraine promises to support Rent on his long journey and offers to conduct experiments on him to gather data about his new form. She plans to use magic to document his body, perform various tests on a piece of his skin, and examine changes in his sleep and appetite. While Rent is initially hesitant about the idea of undergoing so many experiments, Lorraine decides to postpone them to the next day. The following day, Rent wakes up early to train, realizing that the strange impulses from the previous day have disappeared, and he feels back to normal. However, he notices that his sword, used against the giant skeleton, is severely worn out. Unable to take the damaged weapon into the labyrinth, Rent visits the blacksmith Cloak's shop to explain the situation. Cloak is displeased with the state of the sword but offers to provide another, slightly better and more resilient, as Rent is one of his valued customers. Rent accepts the new weapon and sets out to continue exploring the labyrinth with the goal of achieving a new existential evolution. Along the way, he encounters Loris and Isabel, who are buying various foods for their work at the Red Dragon Tavern. This brings an end to our episode. If you enjoyed it, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for more anime recaps.